and welcome to Point of View, the show that decodes the region and beyond. I am WASBIR Hussain. Bharat has become a global trend and India meets the world at every stage. Today, India plays a pivotal role in geopolitics and has succeeded in maintaining a delicate balancing act with big powers like the United States, China and Russia, and this while advocating for a multipolar world. As a member of Quad, India contributes to Indo-Pacific security, countering China's influence, and India's leadership in the global south through forums like the G20 and BRICS amplifies its voice on issues like climate change, trade and development. Some of the questions to ask is whether India's global stature is growing because it has emerged as the world's fastest growing major economy and is projected to be the third largest economy by 2028 or 2030, or whether it is India's robust leadership under Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team that is responsible for India to be taken seriously by the international community. Also, whether it is India's military prowess as demonstrated by the recent battering of Pakistan that has made the world sit up and take notice. Before I attempt to seek answers from my eminent panelists tonight, I would also like to state that today, Indians definitely feel proud to see fellow countrymen being swiftly evacuated and brought home from trouble spots around the world, whether it is in Iran, Israel or Ukraine. That was not the case until some decades ago. Joining me tonight from Toronto is Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. In the studio with me, I have Lieutenant General Rana Pratap Kalita, former General Officer Commanding in Chief of the Army's Eastern Command. Joining me from Singapore is Dr. Ivan Lidarev, Asian security expert and visiting research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore. And joining me from New Delhi is Dr. Swaran Singh, who is a professor of international relations at the Jawaharlal Nehru University and one of India's best known global affairs expert. Gentlemen, welcome to Point of View. Now, we are discussing today, as the topic suggests, Global Bharat, the big picture. Let me first go to you, Ambassador Bhatia, joining me from Toronto tonight. Ambassador Bhatia, I was asking the first question, India's growing stature. What are some of the reasons according to you? Is it India's economic power, economic strength? It has already surpassed Japan as the third, and has become the fourth largest economy. And by 2028 or 2030, it is going to surpass Germany and become the third largest economy, or whether it is the robust leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has an absolute majority in parliament, or is it India's military prowess? Do you think these are some of the reasons why India is taken seriously today, or do you think otherwise?
Thank you very much, Wasbir. It's a pleasure to connect with you. I would try to give you a bit of a North American perspective as well.
Right.
But fundamentally, I look at India from the Indian prism. I think the answer to your question is that there are at least four factors which are responsible for the growing international profile of India. First of all, as you rightly said in your introduction, it is the economic progress of the country. Then secondly, political stability at the central government. Third, undoubtedly, very charismatic and popular personality of our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi. But finally, and very importantly, is India's expanding world view. There used to be a time when India was quite content to play through its foreign policy the role in its neighborhood and the dealings with the certain great powers. But now, through various policy subsets such as Look East policy, Look West policy, Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, and now the Global South strategy, for India, the entire world is a stage. It stretches from Fiji to Trinidad and Tobago, and from Argentina to Uzbekistan. This is the most important thing, and you have chosen a very right moment to organize this program, because in the last few weeks, India has been heavily engaged in very many international events, and I'm sure we'll go into them in detail as we proceed further with this program. So thank you once again for conceiving it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador. And you have written several important commentaries, and I had the privilege of reading several of them. I will come to that, Ambassador, in a while. Let me go to Dr. Swaran Singh in New Delhi, Professor of International Relations at the JNU. Dr. Swaran Singh, how would you like to address? What are your initial thoughts on the topic of discussion today, that India's growing stature?
Thank you, WASBIR. I first of all wish to share that I fully agree with Ambassador Bhatia's assessment. What I can say in addition is that it takes a whole spectrum of several elements coming together to make India the way India looks today at international stage. Of course, a very dynamic, proactive leadership of Prime Minister is orchestrating that new India globally in that sense. But it's also the whole civilizational ethos, the civilizational power that India has always believed in, engaging the world and seeing world as one. And that was true even when we had, relatively less leverages. And now, of course, India is the fourth largest economy, a leading hub for technology, and so on, largest democracy, and many things can be put together. On top of it, of course, is the technical and economic power. And how to articulate that at global level has a very different genre now. Let me say this in 30 seconds, that right from beginning of India's independence, there was a set of political elite that believed in dialogue, persuasion, and peace, which ruled us for almost the first 5 decades or nearly 6 decades. At that time also there was this other set of political elite that used to talk about India must build nuclear weapon right from 1950s. Now it so happens that when India emerges as a powerful nation, as a powerful dynamic society, that particular power elite happens to be at the helm today, which is very confident in wielding and using and asserting power. And that makes India a very different India at the global stage, as assertive India that wants to follow its own civilizational perspectives, its own national interest, but engaged with as many countries in as many sectors as possible. And I think that is a combination of several things coming together that makes India very visible. And my last point on this is the unique thing that only Indian Prime Minister has introduced in international relations. Never in history you saw that a leader visiting a foreign land has large number of people chanting his name. This has never happened in any other leader's case. It happens in Prime Minister's case because he constantly engages with community engagement with people of Indian origin and turn them into ambassadors of India in that sense. And that is very unique way of presenting India at the global stage. And I think that is something that has really made the world look around and see India as a completely different and very, very persuasive and powerful country today.
Absolutely. That is what Professor Swaran Singh was saying. The chant, Modi, Modi. Let's listen in before I go to General. See, yes, Professor Swaran Singh, you very rightly said, in a foreign soil, the diaspora is so enthusiastic about the visiting Prime Minister. I mean, several of the Indians living abroad are now saying that our stature has gone up because of the prime ministerial visits and, then his interaction with the diaspora, wherever he goes, so on and so forth. I will go to Ivan last because he will be giving us a foreign perspective or an Asian perspective. But before coming to you, Ivan, let me turn to General R.P. Kalita, Army Commander of the Eastern Command until recently. He's a military man, but let's hear his perspective. I had also raised the question, General, whether apart from the leadership of Prime Minister, apart from India's economic strength, is it India's military prowess also that is responsible for India being taken note of and taken seriously by the global community today?
Yeah, definitely, Wasbir, you are very right. Firstly, I would like to say that I agree with what Ambassador Bhatia and Professor Swaran Singh had mentioned about the reasons which enabled India to arrive at the global scenario. But I would also like to state that a couple of more reasons. Firstly, geography itself gives India immense, advantage because of the nature of its location in the Indo-Pacific gives us immense importance in the trade route of the whole world. So, that's geographical location is an advantage, and secondly, of course, the military power is a must, because to have internal stability or a stable border, so that our economy can grow or our diplomatic view or our global outreach can enhance. For that you require stability within the country, and that can be provided by the military hard power. So, something which has been displayed and substantiated during Operation Sindoor, and which I think the whole world has taken note of. So, that is something which is very, very essential, and alongside that hard power, I also feel that soft power which India has immense potential and which has been leveraged in number of occasions, that is another thing which enables India to re-establish its position in the global arena.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Dr. Ivan Liderev, sitting in Singapore, what are some of the thoughts that cross your mind? How do you look at India? How do you look at India's, how is India being looked upon by the global community? What are your thoughts from as somebody who is sitting outside the country, outside the subcontinent?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure being together with such very impressive speakers. I think that India is, generally speaking, seen very positively internationally. It's seen as a rising great power, as a rising developing country. Impressively, a country which is both a very close partner of the West, but also a very important voice for the global South. And I think that this is a very important balance that India has been able to make over the years. And looking at the different factors which have led to India's rise, of course, we discussed some of the hardware factors, India's growing economy, its military might. These are very important things. But I think it's also important to look at the software part of it. For example, India's very skillful diplomacy, its ability to balance between different blocks. It's member of Quad on one hand, it's member of SCO and BRICS on the other. This is a very big achievement, very difficult balancing act, especially in the last couple of months, by the way. And then India also has been able very successfully to craft a narrative about its own rise. The rise of a developing country which is democratic, which is also a voice of the global South. That's a very, very big thing, I think, for India. Also, I think that, of course, there is the issue of leadership, kind of a strong, very predictable leadership, which increases India's weight on the international stage. I'm sure we're going to discuss this more during the discussion. But I think also another very important thing that we should not forget is also the fact that India has been able to deal with many of its great internal security weaknesses. Think about the Kashmiri insurgency, which was Pakistan supported. Think about, for example, the Khalistani insurgency in Punjab for many decades. Think about the Maoists, who are now on their last legs pretty much. In many ways, India has been able very successfully to deal with these internal security challenges. And this increases India's image as a kind of a successful, stable country. And finally, in terms of software, I think it's also very important to think of India's diaspora. And I think Professor Swaran Singh mentioned this. India doesn't have yet a lobby internationally, but has a huge diaspora, which it has been able to mobilize. And I think that this diaspora increases India's soft power. It creates a very positive narrative about India and Indians. And very critically, I think this diaspora also has a very big impact on India's hard power.
Right.
Because it kind of attracts business and helps India develop both economically, politically, and militarily in many ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, let me turn once again to Ambassador Bhatia. Bhatia. Ambassador, India pursues a multi-alignment policy. It has a delicate balancing act dealing with the United States, China, the Russia, and so on. And it has a global strategic partnership with the United States. At the same time, it is active in multilateral organizations, whether it is G20, whether it is BRICS, ASEAN, BIMSTEC, Quad, and so on and so forth. Now, apart from, of course, the United Nations. Now, what kind of an effort is necessary? Because this is something, we started with non-alignment as we grew after independence. Then we have diversified, we have expanded our reach into various platforms, various groupings.
Thank you once again for a pertinent question. I think when the policy of non-alignment was crafted, it was a different world. It was a bipolar world where the world was divided into two camps, and India was among the few countries which devised the third way, ensuring independence and foreign policy. That era is gone. We are now in the present decade of the 21st century, where the multipolarity has been expanding, and this has in particular expanded further ever since President Trump took charge of the White House. So in this age, the policy of multi-alignment makes a great deal of sense. It is based on the supposition that in foreign policy there are no permanent friends nor permanent enemies. There are only permanent interests. And we have seen the wisdom of this policy vis-a-vis particularly China and the US. For the past 20 years, our relationship with US has been very strong, and yet in the last few months, new tensions have emerged, which necessitate for India to remain flexible with the other side. And as a result, you have seen India is building and working on gradually the resetting of relationship with China. So in a way, the wisdom of multi-alignment is very clearly established. But the last point I would like to make is that in this context, the focus on the global south is something very significant. This began, I think, during India's presidency of G20, and it has reached its zenith so far at the recent BRICS summit. You remember what President Lula said.
Yeah.
He said that BRICS is the heir to the non-aligned movement. So in a way, there is a continuation but adaptation because of the changes of the time.
Because India's leadership in the global south today, Ambassador, is very, very important, because one of the critical issues that faces us today is climate change and, of course, debt relief. These are the two critical issues. We will deal a little bit with that with you, Ambassador. Let me once again quickly turn to Professor Swaran Singh. Professor, the Prime Minister's recent visit to Brazil, I look at it as a very, very significant step, because both India and Brazil are working together for a permanent membership, for a permanent seat in the United Nations, permanent membership of the UN Security Council. How do you look at it? Because do you think that is something which will make everything complete if India gets a permanent membership of the UN Security Council?
I may disappoint you, Basveer, on this, because I have slightly a very different view on that subject.
Right.
I think India outside UN Security Council puts the onus on UN Security Council. If UN Security Council wants to be reflective and representative of the world we live in and be effective in its implementation of various resolutions it passes, it is now incumbent upon UN Security Council to make sure countries like India or Brazil are made part of UN Security Council on permanent basis. In fact, India's credibility, I even dare say, being outside United Nations Security Council is perhaps much more than in case India becomes member of UN Security Council, where it may be under pressure to either take sides. There are already divisions in UN Security Council Permanent P5, China, Russia on one side, UK, France and United States on other. India may be pushed to take sides. So India is right now not facing that kind of a situation But let me also underline that the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro, because President Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping did not show up there, brought enormous focus and I think expectation from India's Prime Minister being there, and of course India is going to be seen as an important country as guiding consensus in that. BRICS is also now being called the other G20 because now they have 10 members and another 10 partner nations. Of course, another 20 want to join it as well.
Yeah.
So the aspiration of several nations to bring credibility to BRICS makes India's participation in BRICS very interesting. I want to make a point that India is seen today as voice of sanity, both in groupings like BRICS, where you have China and Russia. Preponderance of their views are always visible there. They want to focus on de-dollarization. Likewise, India is also voice of sanity in quadrilateral security framework, where we often hear voices which are anti-China in that sense, focusing on containment of China. So it's a balancing thing. And allow me, Basveer, to just make one quick point on the military power of India. And I hope General Kalita will agree with me. India today has between 4th or 5th largest defense budget in the world, also one of the largest militaries, nuclear weapons state, very potent armed forces. But the legitimacy, respect and power of India's military that comes to India's stature is because of two reasons. One, look at your periphery, your neighborhood from Pakistan in west to Thailand in the east, the way militaries have behaved in these countries. Indian military has continued to be extremely professional, ensuring primacy of politics in their civil and military relationship. Second point, it is not the power of Indian military which impresses the world, it is the restraint of Indian armed forces.
Absolutely.
You look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine for 4+ years, what now Israel is doing in Gaza for more than a year. India's Operation Sindoor was very precise. In fact, we went to start that saying that we are willing to stop it as soon as our objectives are filled. In fact, that presents an example how to use your armed forces in a very precise fashion. And I think that brings greater credibility to India as a nation which can command its military and use it to just exactly fulfill political objectives. And not go out of control the way things are happening in some other countries where militaries are really going berserk and they have their own pressure. Pakistan is another example. Field Marshal now, Asim Munir, is the way he's leading the country. So I think that power of Indian military brings enormous prestige to India as a nation. And that I think needs salutations to Indian Armed Forces.
Absolutely, absolutely. I cannot agree with you more, Dr. Swaran Singh. As I asked you to my first question about the United Nations, I think that the UN that needs to initiate reforms. It's time for the United Nations to initiate certain reforms and accommodate the views of countries which they have sort of tried to little bit keep away from so long. Let me come to General Kalita before I once again go to Ivan and then go to Ambassador Bhatia. General Kalita, what Dr. Swaran Singh said, we saw how the militaries in the neighboring countries are behaving. Like it is Asim Munir, the field marshal, quote unquote, the so-called field marshal, who went to the US and represented his country instead of their prime minister. Such kind of a thing is something which cannot be unheard of in India.
Yeah, right. That's absolutely right, because as a nation we have got very strong democratic values imbibed in ourselves, enshrined in the whole country. And the armed forces, which one of the main instrument of national power of the country, respects those democratic values, and being an extremely professional army, it listens to the higher defense organizational structure that is laid out, which takes those important decisions. These are all consultative processes through which important decisions are taken, of which the Indian Armed Forces is also part of. So, unlike in our neighborhood where armed forces have very frequently usurped power by various coup or something like that, we see a very professional approach of the Indian Armed Forces. And like Professor Swaran Singh had mentioned, which has been proved by Operation Sindoor, in the initial operation on 6th and 7th night, the terrorist infrastructure were stuck without any collateral damage to any other civilian infrastructure or even military infrastructure for that matter.
Right.
And when the Pakistan responded by targeting our civilians in Jammu and Kashmir as also the military infrastructure, then also Indian armed forces only targeted the military infrastructure of the Pakistan state. So, it did not target the civilian infrastructure at all. So, that again highlights the professional approach of the Indian armed forces, which are also proven in various multilateral forums as well. In United Nations peacekeeping forces, Indian armed forces is one of the most sought after armed forces to be part of the various peacekeeping missions. That is proven by the high percentage of the Indian peacekeepers as part of the UN missions. And secondly, we have joint training with most of the armies now, right from USA, French, and even our third world countries with everybody.
Right.
So, all these prove on the respect which the world has for the professionalism of the Indian armed forces.
Right, Ambassador Bhatia, what kind of weight or what kind of importance do you give to soft power projection? Whether it is cultural diplomacy, whether it is humanitarian aid and development, leadership in digital transformation. Because India's digital steps, like for example the UPI, the way we make our payments today, that has been adopted by several countries in the world today. So, what kind of a weightage do you give to this to this soft power approach?
I think soft power is important, and I think if it is combined with hard power, then it becomes smart power. So India is fully cognizant of the need to, on the one hand, keep itself militarily and from the viewpoint of economy strong, but at the same time make full use of its soft power which it has as a 5,000-year-old civilizational state. And I think I can say with full conviction that in the recent unparalleled diplomatic odyssey of Prime Minister Modi to 2 continents, 5 countries, 6 cities in 8 days, we saw the full display of India's soft power. We keep talking about public diplomacy, economic diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, digital diplomacy, and diaspora diplomacy. All these strands were woven well into the way astutely the Prime Minister's visit was planned. At the same time, WASBIR, I think it's very important also, and I'm sure you will come later. It is not hunky-dory and milk and honey for India's foreign policy. There are challenges, and we saw them at BRICS and elsewhere, but we will touch them as and when you are ready. Thank you.
Absolutely, we'll definitely talk about the challenges. That is extremely important for an objective discussion. Let me go to Ivan Lidorev, Dr. Ivan Lidorev. As Ambassador Bhatia was saying, I was asking the question about India's soft power policy, soft power diplomacy. Now the point is, after Operation Sindoor, the India's outreach program comprising elected members of parliament belonging to all the political parties, and where one particular political figure, if I pick from that entire lot, was Mr. Shashi Tharoor, the Congress leader. He's a Congress MP. But when it comes to national interest, whether it is Congress or whether it is any other party, despite the huge differences at home, I think the world stage, when it comes to foreign policy, I think the Indian political class has always spoken in one voice, and that was demonstrated during the outreach program after Operation Sindoor, when these MPs traveled the whole world. How do you view it? What are your thoughts, Ivan?
Well, I think that obviously this was a very important show of national unity in a obviously difficult moment when India was attacked by terrorists sponsored by Pakistan, and also a moment of conflict with Pakistan. So I think that it sent a very good message. Also, very importantly, it sent a message that India cannot be divided along communal lines, because I strongly believe that one of the ideas of the terrorist operation was to divide India along religious lines. And you can see this, by the way, consistently in the last 30, 40 years, terrorists trying to kind of create communal tensions between the Hindu majority and the Muslim minority in India. And this was not successful. You saw, for example, the reaction in Kashmir to the terrorist attack. So I think that the outreach operation by sending these diplomatic missions was a very important part of kind of shifting the discussion internationally away from the war, which had gotten too much media attention, and back to the fundamental issue of Pakistani support for terrorism. Because for many years, in many ways, Pakistan has always shifted the discussion, the international discussion, away from terrorism and toward regional crisis dynamics. Essentially, whether we are going to have a war, whether this war is going to become a nuclear war. And this has allowed Pakistan in many ways to get away from its support for militancy. And I think that in many ways, those delegations managed to refocus the international discussion. Also, it showed a great Indian ambition to reach out to many countries. You know, they sent delegations to many countries which are not great powers. They sent delegations to small Eastern European countries and so on. So I think it was a very good way to measure India's new standing as a more of a global power, not only a country that deals with the major powers such as the US or Russia, but also which deals with smaller countries, including, for example, important middle powers such as Singapore. For example, there was a major delegation here in Singapore. So in a certain sense, it shows the ambition of a rising India, which wants to be much more perceived as a global power.
Right. We'll go for a quick break. Don't go away, viewers. When I come back, I'll go direct to Professor Swaran Singh and the rest of my panelists to carry forward this very interesting discussion on Global Bharat, the big picture.
নালাগেও দাঁতৰ বিষ মোৰ
যিহেৰে তই ব্ৰাছ কৰ সেইটো টুথপেষ্ট
তই কিহেৰে কৰ
সেই আছা মই ব্ৰাছ কৰো দানকান্তিৰে ই সাধাৰণ টুথপেষ্ট নহয় টুথপেষ্ট হয়
আকাৰকাৰা লং পিপলিৰ দৰে 16বিধ আয়ুৰ্বেদিক তত্ত্বৰ মিশ্ৰণ যি দাঁতৰ ক্ষয় কেভিটি পায়েৰিয়াৰ বিৰুদ্ধে যুঁজে আৰু দাঁত আৰু আলু কৰি ৰাখে প্ৰাকৃতিকভাৱে শক্তিশালী
আইটিচি নিমাইল মজিয়া কৰি তোলে নিৰাপদ শিশু আৰু পেটছৰ বাবে কাৰণ মজিয়াতে পাৰ হয় লৰালি কাল হে ইয়াত কেমিকেল ৰেচিডিউৰ বাবে কোনো ঠাই নাই
একেই সুগন্ধি একেই তীব্ৰ গোন্ধ মা কি তীৰ্থযাত্ৰাৰ পৰা উভতি আহিলে নেকি মা আহিলে নেকি
মা নহয় মাৰ হাতৰ সোৱাদ আহিলে
মাৰ হাতৰ সোৱাদ আহিলে
পতঞ্জলি কাচ্চিঘানি বিশুদ্ধ সৰিয়হৰ তেল
ইয়াৰ তীব্ৰ গোন্ধে বিশুদ্ধতাৰ ওপৰত বিশ্বাস সূচায় প্ৰতিগৰাকী মাতৃৰ প্ৰথম পছন্দ পতঞ্জলি কাচ্চিঘানি বিশুদ্ধ সৰিয়হ তেল বিশ্বাস আছে সেইবাবে বিশ্বাস আছে নিজকে আৰু নিজ পৰিয়ালক ভেজাল বিষয়ৰ পৰা সুৰক্ষিত কৰক কেৱল আৰু কেৱল পতঞ্জলি কাচ্চিঘানি বিশুদ্ধ সৰিয়হ তেল গ্ৰহণ কৰক
Okay, let me go to Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Swaran Singh, do you get a sense that India is trying to recalibrate its strategy with China? Because we saw a lot of heated cross talk between the United States and China over that we saw that trade war. Some kind of a thaw in that trade war appears to have emerged. We don't know how it pans out in the days ahead. Do you think that is one of the reasons, or do you think the geopolitics has enabled or rather forced India to sort of recalibrate its equations with China? Because, for example, the Chinese too are saying that, okay, we should resume direct flights between India and China that was snapped during COVID, so on and so forth.
See, this question has been answered with far more clarity by Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar himself several times, including in his book Why Bharat Matters, and of course also in the India Way. India fundamentally seeks to build much stronger developmental partnership with the United States, but at the same time manage, quote unquote, a relationship with the immediate large neighbor called China. And in that sense, the focus has been in managing and not immediately being very confident of resolving issues. And in that managing, India wants to not being seen as bandwagoning United States, and therefore very often India has to deal with pressures from United States, particularly during the first term of President Trump, and of course not yet, but could potentially again come back on India in that sense. But when you mentioned approach that India has vis-a-vis China, particularly from October last year when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi met in Kazan and a whole new process of disengagement started, India believes in resolving the border issues first, and the language Foreign Minister uses is relations are not normal as long as borders are not normalized, and therefore India has focused on disengagement, demilitarization of the border, and starting, for example, Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which is border centric. Chinese, on the other hand, have a very different take on the subject. They believe no single issue should be allowed to hold the entire relationship hostage. And they want to open the entire relationship simultaneously. Therefore, they want to talk about trade, they want to talk about flights, they want to talk about every issue on the table, which is now how India looks at it. And therefore, certain kind of, I think, progression has continued. We will possibly see end of this month, 25th round of special representative talks happening in New Delhi as the Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit. Right now, this Sunday, Dr. Jaishankar is, after a long time, after Galwan crisis, first time going to China to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Foreign Ministers meeting. So certain dialogue is continuing, trade is continuing, but there are issues where India and China really have to be very skeptical and cautious. And to that, let me add very quickly in about 30 seconds, the new kind of relationship that Chinese are building with Pakistan. What happened during the recent 3 weeks back Shanghai Cooperation Organization Defense Ministers meeting, where Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh refused to sign the joint statement, was very aggressive way of not mentioning Pahalgam, but mentioning Balochistan. And that pandering to Pakistan as its most allied ally, supporting that country during these military confrontation with India, that to me sets a kind of a China-Pakistan Axis 2.0, which India will have to be careful in calibrating how to deal with this combination of China and Pakistan. China is also holding trilateral meetings with China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Absolutely.
You know, India has to be really careful as to how to manage that relationship. But we, of course, have our own set of challenges with India-US relationship as well. Maybe we will talk about it in the second half of discussion.
Right, absolutely, and we cannot also miss the fact, General Saab will agree, we cannot also miss the fact that China is using Pakistan to test its latest military hardware, because they're used in real war situations. Only this time most of their weapons were used in a real war situation during the recent clash between India and Pakistan, and they got a battering there, and there were question marks on the Chinese weapon system. I said that's a different debate. We'll not go into that. Let me go to quickly to, before coming to General and Ivan, once again to Ambassador Bhatia. Ambassador Bhatia, you talked about challenges. When we talk about global Bharat, the big picture. Now, if we look at our neighborhood, big players are at play as far as Bangladesh is concerned. That is Bangladesh has suddenly emerged as the new irritant for India. Okay, we know Pakistanis, we have been dealing with them for a long time. We know the Chinese, we have been dealing with them for a long time. But we have become some sort of a complacent as far as Bangladesh is concerned, and it has emerged as a new irritant, where the Chinese also are playing a big role. They are playing into the thing. And the Americans are also interested in Bangladesh, opening some kind of a corridor, the Rakhine corridor, which there is a division within Bangladesh. How do you look at our neighborhood? There is turmoil in Myanmar. There is absolute instability. People are coming into states like Mizoram, refugees, they belong to the same ethnic stock. It's a very delicate situation for India not to let them come in because they are the same ethnic stock as the tribes people on our side. So how do you look at the situation in our neighborhood in view of the developments in Bangladesh and Myanmar?
The question of South Asia, our neighborhood, the very first question that comes to one's mind is that there are nothing but challenges. But that would be unfair to say that. I think there are challenges and there are very much potential for opportunities. But looking at the eastern rim, it is very clear that India-Bangladesh relations are passing through a very difficult, very delicate phase. Bangladesh is under all kinds of pressure internally and externally, and the only way it knows how to release that pressure is to keep saying and doing things which annoy and irritate India. And this comes in the recent memory of how close for the past 15 years our relations with Bangladesh were. You referred to the implications for Myanmar, which is another challenge because Myanmar has also been fully destabilized in the last 4 years after the military coup. This whole business of corridor that you spoke about, it still remains only on paper. It is far from being implemented because barring one or two parties, nobody seems to agree. You have a situation where Myanmar borderland is not under the control of the central military government. So in a way, India has to be very, very conscious and cautious about its two eastern neighbors, Myanmar and Bangladesh. But I want to also bring in obviously the larger issues, which is the continuing challenge from Pakistan. No matter how strongly and loudly we say we have won the last conflict, Pakistan says the same thing. And the world therefore is a bit confused as to what really was the outcome. On top of that, there is China. Both our panelist General Kalita and Professor Soren Singh is talking about that. China will remain a kind of a permanent challenge for India's quest for a special niche or place in the world. On top of that, finally, we have to be very clear that some of the things that excite us are not going to happen. For example, reform of the UN Security Council. This has been on the agenda for a long time. We shall continue clamoring for it, but we know that not just to the permanent members of the Security Council, but also many other entities in the international community are opposed to the idea. So we will have to continue our struggle. And on top of that, and this is my final point, WASBIR, on climate change, given the American approach today and the fragmentation of the G7, it is clear that the developed economies are not going to give too much money for energy transition, too much technology for energy transition. Therefore, India will have to learn to stand on its feet, which is exactly what India's government is doing through self-help, the strategy and approach on energy transition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, General Kalita, we talked about the neighborhood. Now the point is 80% of Bangladesh's military weapons come from China. Chinese are arming the junta in Myanmar. We don't know whether they are also helping some of the anti-junta groups. So it's a very complex kind of a situation. India has a lot of interest because in view of the difficult situation that we are going through with Bangladesh, there was hope earlier that we'll be using the Sitwe port in Myanmar as a bypassing Bangladesh. That is about 110 miles from or kilometers from Aizawl, that is the capital of Mizoram. But that is also not happening because of the disturbed situation in Myanmar. So how do you look at this emerging situation, and do you think things are going to stabilize sooner than later?
See, one of the biggest problem what has emerged lately is the situation in Bangladesh, because prior to the coup, should I say, or removal of Sheikh Hasina government from power, India had a good relationship with Bangladesh, and things were looking quite positive. But after the changeover of power, since the time Yunus has taken over, Professor Yunus had taken over as the caretaker government. So, since then there has been rising firstly Islamic fundamentalism, then also release of some of the terrorist group from the jail, which are not in interest of India definitely. And one of the major issue which we face is the crucial Siliguri corridor, which connects the northeast towards the rest of the country, because we see Chinese footprint growing all around the Siliguri corridor. They had been involved in lot of developments in eastern Nepal. They are trying to come into Bhutan, like in Doklam Plateau they tried to come in 2017, leading on to standoff of 73 days. In northern Bangladesh, in Rangpur division, they are carrying out lot of infrastructure development projects. As also recently we know that it has been spoken about that they had a trilateral conference between China, Pakistan and Bangladesh, and we have also seen the increasing visit by Pakistan Armed Forces representative to Bangladesh, including the DG ISI who had visited some months back. And recently we also saw in the news that there are 3 Bangladeshi brigadiers who were probably from the ISI, and they had visited and then gone into the Ramu camp, that is where 10 Infantry Division of Bangladesh is located, where probably they are reportedly had met with some insurgent groups from the northeast as well. So, all these developments do not augur well for Indian interest, and particularly at the vulnerabilities of northeast. And recently we have seen that Kaladan multimodal transit project, which we had spoken about, that is still languishing. There has been, it is not progressing, though I think yesterday only the Honorable Minister Sarbananda Sonowal had announced that by 2027 it is likely to get through, but that the road stretch between Paletwa and Joranpui, only 20 kilometers has been, some work has been done. Otherwise, that's still no progress has been made. So, these challenges remain.
These are the challenges that still remains, and these are challenges that we will go back to the big picture before with Ivan, and I am coming to you, Dr. Swaran Singh, and then to Ambassador, and close this discussion. Ivan, do you get a sense that China is deliberately utilizing this opportunity to consolidate its string of pearls policy through investing and increasing ties, military ties, and helping in infrastructure development in Bangladesh and Myanmar, and trying to needle India's and create a new front in the eastern frontier of India. Do you get that sense?
Well, I get the sense that China is trying to definitely strengthen its position in South Asia, and to develop different corridors to the North Indian Ocean. Does it want to use this as leverage against India? I think it does, although at this point I don't think that they want to pressure India too hard, because I think they are afraid of Indian reaction. Now they're trying to tow relations with India to some extent because of their own confrontation with the US, to some extent because they have economic need to economically engage with India. I think that they see much greater value now in the rising Indian economy than they used to do before. However, I think that there is also a bigger issue there, namely that South Asia is not sufficiently well integrated economically, and this creates a huge opportunity for China. So I think that it's very important for India to realize that unless it starts to economically and infrastructure-wise integrate South Asia, inherently China will start doing so. So I think that this is a very big challenge for India. And also there is the big question, how can India project power on the international stage if it has so many problems in South Asia? One of the big goals, I think, of Chinese policy is to get India bogged down in South Asia so that it cannot project power and rise on the international stage and in the Pacific. And I think that's why they are cooperating so much with Pakistan. And I think they have also found a willing partner in some ways in the new kind of, let's call it, government in Bangladesh. Although I do think that India should not be too worried about Bangladesh, because I think that things there are in flux, and on the longer run, I think that things will start to shift back to India's advantage. But yes, it is true that Bangladesh's behavior in the last couple of months has been very confrontational, and in some ways even a little bit immature, which is strange, bearing in mind the age of the people in charge. But that's how things are right now.
Right. Two important points made by Dr. Ivan Leverett there. One is South Asia is not economically really integrated, and that is a challenge, and China is taking advantage of that fact. And number two is that China perhaps wants India to get bogged down with affairs in its neighborhood so that it gets its other focus is diverted and concentrated in this area. Let me go to Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Swaran Singh, let's take a case study. I'm going into the broad picture once again, away from our neighborhood. Now, take the case study of Russia and Ukraine. And India has been some kind of a traditional ally of Russia, and as a democracy, it cannot also ignore Ukraine, as our Prime Minister or our government has been trying to maintain a delicate balancing act even in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly. I think Ukraine to me presents a case study where India has showcased how it can balance between very, very contradictory pulls and pressures.
Yeah.
Obviously, United States was absolutely unhappy with the fact that India continued and in fact expanded suddenly its oil imports from Russia. They wanted to toe American line and speak and condemn Russia, which India has not condemned Russia at all. But remember, India at the same time has constantly been trying to send humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians on the ground.
Yes.
So what India as a policy has clarified to the world is, one, that India focuses much more on the brass tacks in a conflict situation, the way Ukraine and Russia war has been continuing. And India wants to make sure that victims on the ground are given relief as soon as possible, while at the same time working directly, indirectly to ensure that the parties to conflict themselves come to dialogue rather than one side pushing the other. The whole American approach has been equipping Ukraine to fight against Russia. No effort to make peace. In fact, in the very first 3 weeks of February 2022, when the war began, there were dialogue happening, and that could have perhaps led to certain ceasefire, until you saw the Prime Minister Johnson from UK going to Kiev and telling that whole world is with you and we want you to stand up and fight against Russia, and we have continued to fight for 4.5 years now. So India's approach has really been clarified, and same is happening, for example, on Israel versus Gaza. India has been sending humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians on the ground, but at the same time saying Israel has a right to ensure its security. So I think that is a fantastic way of how both these cases have given an opportunity to India to ensure what I call a proactive neutrality here, which is not static, because India doesn't just stand apart. You have seen Indian Prime Minister constantly pushing, nudging Russian leader again and again, saying this era is not era of war. We should not allow unilateral manipulation of international boundaries. He said, my heart goes out for those people who are receiving the civilians, who are receiving the bombing. And, look at the whole statements after statement, where India has also tried to nudge Russian side. And of course, Angad, you see Prime Ministers having a bear hug with Zelensky as well.
Yes.
So effort to make sure the great leaders who are involved in the conflict themselves begin to talk, while at the same time victims on the ground are provided relief, without taking any sides in that sense. I think this was a difficult choice for India to make, but India has so far steered very clear and ensured its policy is understood And I think increasingly both Russia and United States understand India's own interests will guide their policies, and we will not be bro-beating either side or bandwagoning either side. In that sense, standing for India's own national interests. And I think that has received increasing recognition both in Washington and in Moscow.
Absolutely, I quite like the your coinage, Dr. Swaran Singh, proactive neutrality. Proactive neutrality. I really like it. Last word to you, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Proactive neutrality is how Dr. Swaran Singh describes India's diplomacy today. If we take into account the case studies of Russia and Ukraine conflict, how India has been responding, as well as Israel and Gaza, how India has been responding. What are your thoughts? How would you describe the overall picture? We have got about 2 minutes, about 1.5 minutes to you, Ambassador.
I have great respect for my dear friend, Professor Swaran Singh, but I have some difficulty with his use of the word neutrality. I don't think the Indian establishment uses that word anymore. I think, as you know, the standard stock answer is we are not neutral. We are on the side of peace, dialogue, and diplomacy. But that apart, the central point I want to make in the end, WASBIR, is that the next 18 months or so are going to be very important for India's diplomacy. And the reason is very simple. First of all, India is going to host the Quad Summit, and therefore India will have to track very clearly as to what is Washington's China policy. Much depends on that and our work in the Indo-Pacific. And secondly, India will have to shoulder the responsibility of leading BRICS in 2026. So Quad and BRICS being the two most important plurilateral groupings of which India is a member, India will have to navigate very carefully and astutely the various paradoxes and internal conflicts. And all of us who are involved in studying foreign policy of India and the way the world looks at India, we will have a very interesting time ahead.
Absolutely, we'll have a very interesting time ahead. Really, India is going to host the Quad Summit as well as take over the leadership of BRICS in 2026, less than a year from now. And India's presence on the global stage is characterized, of course, as we have been discussing today, by a strong and growing economy, strategic diplomatic engagements, and increasing soft power influence. And by leveraging these strengths and addressing existing challenges, India aims to become a leading global power and a significant contributor to shaping a more inclusive and equitable world order. I'd like to thank all my panelists for participating in these very engaging discussions and the viewers for watching the show. Good night and goodbye.
নিম, হালধি, চন্দন, এলোভেৰা, মঞ্জিষ্ঠা, পাম তথা নাৰিকলৰ তেল আদিৰে প্ৰস্তুত কৰা পতঞ্জলি বাথ সোপ ব্যৱহাৰ কৰক। প্ৰাকৃতিক স্বচ্ছতা তথা সৌন্দৰ্য লাভ কৰক।
ITC নিমাইল মজিয়া কৰি তোলে নিৰাপদ শিশু